Good afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and call to order our workshop for July 11, 2022. Please rise for a moment of silence followed by the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the
flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I do not see any public input, so I believe in light of some flight schedules that we're going to go ahead and reverse the order of the agenda today. So if we could go ahead and invite our friends from Centegix come forward. Thank you. We're excited to hear from you today.
I appreciate
Appreciate
the
the time. So my name is Rob Kent. I'm with Tentative. What I'd like to do is just give you a really high overview of what the company does, sort of the background of where we came from. As much as I can in this kind of format, give you a demo of the product and let you guys ask us any questions that you may have. Just 1 sec, I need to get one. Company started about 5 or 6 years ago. The technology has been in development for about 8 years. We're based in Atlanta, Georgia. We have, right now, these stats are a little bit old. We've got pretty close to 3,000 locations that we cover and protect over 1.5 million staff and students. As you know, in 2020, there was a legislation in Florida that required, called Alyssa's Law, that required all staff members to have the ability to have a panic button that also integrated with 911. So through that, there were 10 vendors that were selected by the DOE. We are one of those vendors. We are the only vendor that is not based on an app, and we'll talk about that in a minute. We currently have, I think, it's about 18 districts that we're deployed into in Florida. 12 of those districts, we're completely district-wide, and we're growing very rapidly in Florida. Outside of Florida, we're growing very rapidly. We're in about 20 states right now. Last year, we're, I think, number 290 on Deloitte's Fast 500. So we're an established company, and we are growing very, very quickly. Why we're doing this. So the majority, and why we're growing so fast. The majority of vendors out there who offer a solution like ours, like a panic button solution, they're all app-based. So there's something that a staff member needs to download and install on their phone. And so we realized very quickly that there were some significant deficiencies there, and so we wanted to find a different approach. The issues that we ran into with an app, and you're probably familiar with some of these, but one, very low adoption rate. So we've installed several apps in Florida and in other states, and what we found is that the actual adoption rate across the teacher base is about 10%. That's usually what you get with an app. Even if they do have it installed, these apps, they rely on either Wi-Fi or cellular, and so if you don't have connection within the school, when they press the button, they can't call for help. And then what we heard from law enforcement was that the telemetry, the location information that's provided by app-based solutions, it relies on either GPS or it relies on triangulation, like cell phone tower triangulation. In either case, it usually doesn't give law enforcement enough accurate info to successfully respond to an event quickly. The very first thing they hear when they get to a school, the very first question they have is, where is the incident? Where do we need to go to? And it doesn't matter whether you're talking the worst of the worst case scenario, like an active shooter situation where no one knows what's going on, or if you're talking about a 911 call because a child has had a heart attack or some other kind of medical emergency. They need better data to be able to go and provide help. And then finally, the one thing that we've seen and we've experienced is that when there's an issue, and again, it doesn't matter whether it is a worst case scenario like we saw in Uvalde, or whether it's a day-to-day scenarios, the opportunity for a staff member, assuming they have their phone installed, to actually take out their phone, find an app that they don't use on a regular basis and trigger an alert, it doesn't actually happen. And that's supported by the data. The majority of vendors that are out there, if you ask them how often is the app actually used, they can't give you any data. We can tell you that last year alone in Florida, our solution was used 20,000 times. And that's not drills, that's not tests. Those are actual real alerts, real issues that students and staff members had inside of their school. Not lockdowns, obviously. We'll talk about the different types of alerts in a minute. So these are the problems that we are trying to solve when we built Crisis Alert. So what we have, as you have in front of you, is a badge-based emergency notification system. It's not based on Wi-Fi, and it's not based on cellular. It's not based off of the school's network. It runs completely aside from that. And there's really 4 main differentiators for our system. One is the simplicity. So it's literally, this badge does not have to pair to a phone. As long as a staff member has it on them, all they have to do is push this button and they can get help. Number 2, it's got total campus coverage. So because we don't rely on Wi-Fi, because we don't rely on cellular, we're able to guarantee that we get coverage throughout the entire campus. As we go through the installation process and we install our equipment, which we can talk about, we are able to put it into essentially an install mode to check what the signal strength is, and we install more equipment if needed to make sure that we've got coverage everywhere inside and throughout the entire outside campus as well. Because of that, and because of the kind of equipment that we deploy, we don't rely on GPS. So when someone pushes this button, we can identify where they are down to room level accuracy, and we can determine which floor they're on as well. Right? So if you think about the size of a room, if someone pushes a button, you can identify where they are within about 30 feet of where they're standing. We can do that outside as well. There's different parameters for how specific and how precise that location information is. Outside is a little less precise than inside, but we can identify where someone is so the first responders know exactly where they need to go and provide help. And then finally, if it's the worst case scenario, if it's a gun on campus, if it's an active shooter, it's not good enough just to notify 911. That's the purpose of Alyssa's law, and that's really important. You have to get law enforcement there as quickly as possible. But what all the studies have shown and what the FBI data shows is that the only way you keep kids safe, the number one way you keep kids safe, give them the opportunity to get to safety. There has never been a case where an active shooter has breached a locked classroom door, right? So statistically speaking, if you can notify your kids, get them behind that locked classroom door, you're going to keep them safe. The average response time to a school shooting once 911 is notified is 3 to 5 minutes, which is actually really fast. I'm sure you've got some schools where they're a little bit more rural. It's going to take longer to get there. If we look at Parkland, there were 24 people that were shot within the first minute and 45 seconds, right? So it is not physically possible for police to get there fast enough to intervene, which is why we notify everyone on campus, and I'll show you how that works. All right, so this one badge will allow you to do 2 different things. It'll allow you to do a staff alert, and it will allow you to do a campus-wide alert. A staff alert, that's all the day-to-day stuff that happens. It's the medical emergencies, it's the fights, which are increasing, as you know. It's the kids that decide that they're gonna run off campus. It's anything where a staff member feels like they need help. And remember, we give this badge to every staff member, not just every teacher. It's amazing how much custodial staff see things or nutrition staff see things, right? So every staff member, every adult is able to call for help. Here's a map of our office, just for demonstration purposes. It works very simply. You press the button 3 times, and you can all press the button, yours as well. It's a demo badge, it won't do anything. And it will pop up with essentially an Amber Alert style alert. Do we have sound on there? Essentially an Amber Alert style alert on the responders' devices. So each school can select who their responders are. We've got some best practices that we've developed. Typically, it's your principal, your APs, your SROs or guardians, and your nurses. They're all notified on their desktops and on their mobile device who needs help and a map of the school so they know exactly where they need to go. And that usually happens in about 2 seconds, 3 seconds from when that button is pushed. Very, very quick. This is what's been used 20,000 times in Florida. This is what's used every single day. On average, what you can expect is 1 to 2 alerts per school per week. So it's not completely overwhelming, right? Your SROs are able to handle that kind of volume, but those are the types of volumes that we can expect across your schools. Now, if it is an active shooter, and this is what Alyssa's law pertains to, it's the same badge. Rather than pressing it 3 times, they just continue to press that button over and over again until that school goes into lockdown. We've got some technical things on the back end that say how many pushes that we can talk through. When we do our training, we make sure that they understand you just keep pressing until that school goes into lockdown. When a school goes into lockdown, there's several different things that happen. So we have these strobes that we put in every single classroom, right? We put them in every classroom, we put them in hallways every 50 feet, entrances and exits. We put them in restrooms and bathrooms. Any room that can hold essentially more than one person, we're going to put one of these. These all start to flash red immediately. So your entire campus is blanketed with emergency strobes that are flashing. Then what we do is we take over every single screen inside of the campus with a lockdown message. So anything that runs Windows or Mac is going to have a lockdown message that's displayed. And I think we might be having some problem with audio, but we also broadcast a message over the intercom. Oh, we only have the Spanish one. We can play it in multiple languages. You can have it repeat. You can customize it for your local school policy. But immediately, within 5 seconds of activating that alert, we've got lights, we've got an automated intercom announcement, we take over every single screen, and then we also notify 911 as well. So it's not just the local, but it's also integrating with 911. In Florida, obviously, that's a big concern because we have to work with the local PSAP and the local sheriff. We've got several different ways that we can do that integration. The typical way is just through what's called an E911, which can either be text or voice or a combination of both. There's no additional cost to the school district. There's no additional cost to the sheriff's department. It just really depends on how they want that integration to work. And then there's just one other thing as far as our core capabilities. In addition to the badge, and remember we give the badge to every single staff member, certain members of your staff will have the ability to run other types of protocols. And they can do that from an app or they can do that from their desktop. So there could be a shelter in place because there's inclement weather coming down. So you can customize a system so that the lights could flash a different color, the intercom could automatically play a different message, your screen takeover could be something different for shelter in place. You can customize as many of those different types of protocols that you want. We have it preloaded based on protocols from the I Love You Guys Foundation, but you can customize it to your own district. So we're not telling you what your protocols should be. We're giving you the technology so that you can automate those protocols throughout your schools. All right, I'm going to stop really quick. Any questions that you guys have about the technology, about the capabilities? I haven't talked in detail about the technology, but any questions about the capabilities?
So how are you able to do it without being tied into the Wi-Fi?
So at each school, I'm glad you asked. So this is sort of a very high-level marketing slide, but at the bottom quadrant there, you see this gateway, right? There's one of those gateways that gets installed at every school. That just requires a regular Ethernet connection. That's what gives us connection into our equipment. All the other equipment that we deploy, this one here was just for demo purposes. This is an actual piece that we deploy in your schools. These are all 100% wireless, right? It's battery operated. That battery will last 5 to 7 years, and it does not require any kind of wiring. So it runs off of a mesh network that we put together, which is based off of 2 industry standard protocols. One is called Bluetooth Low Energy. The other one is called Zigbee. We combine these in a way that gives us a couple of benefits. One, it's completely self-healing. So if a battery was to die, because that happens, or if a kid was to bash one of these out with a baseball bat, the system would heal up around itself and it would still function. It also gives us incredible range. So you get about 400 feet line of sight from badge to locating beacon. Obviously, construction material, lockers, kids, that's all going to diminish the strength, but we do have a very long range. And because of the way that we do our installation, we know what that signal strength is, and so we install enough equipment. So that's how this runs completely independently of the school's network.
But ultimately, you've got to get out of the network and get to the police. So
Correct.
So how does that happen?
So those gateways that we deploy, they've got 2 different types of connections. They've got, that connects through your school's internet feed, and it also has a wireless backup as well that is completely off of yours. So when I say it doesn't run on your school's network, I'm referring to the internal network. So it does go into the server room so that it can get internet connection, but it doesn't run internally off the Wi-Fi.
Alex, how often do we lose internet connection?
With the way we have our redundant fibering set up, it's very, very intermittent. We have a redundant connection at all but a couple of the schools. I'd have to get with Dwayne to find out the exact count now, but it's even better than it was. It's very, very seldom.
And again, we do have that fixed wireless backup that's built into the gateway as well. So if your internet is down for some reason, if the internet's up but someone trips over the cable and the router goes down, it's going to automatically fail over to that wireless connection.
Thank you.
Now, do you all map out the schools, or do we provide schematics and you kind of lay them on top of each other? So if like we're on the second floor of a building, how does it know
Yeah.
where it is in the building to be able to provide that pinpoint?
So one of the very first parts of the project is we collect your fish maps, and then we re-render your fish maps into our application. And we kind of use Google Maps as well, so that we can map the outdoor areas, parking lots, playgrounds, soccer fields, that kind of thing. And so we render those all in. If you have multiple floors, we've two different strategies depending on how many floors you have and how big that is, but we render them all on the same map. And so when there's an alert on a specific floor, it will highlight that floor, so you'll know exactly where to go.
Was there some cost in? Superintendent,
Yes, sir.
did y'all hand out costs on this, or no?
We have
I
the
did not.
quote.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was included. I know
Do we have it at this point?
we do have the quote, yes.
Or do we have it? Because I can't
I
find it.
don't know if you
I did not
received a
include it in that
copy of
packet. That wasn't included in that packet. I
Okay,
apologize.
We do have it.
I do have a couple of questions about the price.
Yep.
I believe the contract is for 5 years,
That's correct.
and I believe that there's an initial payment and then there's a second payment, but it's all within the first year of operation. Is that also correct?
So the way that it's structured is that there's a 5-year contract, which includes the subscription fee for those 5 years. And then there's the initial physical installation, because we come and we physically install all the equipment for you. I don't know that we've solidified yet what the actual payment terms would be, but we can structure that in different ways for you. We can get creative in
Well, I
what
heard
works for
your
the district.
presentation at the School Board Association, and I spoke to our security people about it. But that was one of the things that I was a little bit concerned about after your and I think it was you. There
think
were a
it
lot
was.
of people.
At the
but I
FSBA?
think I
Yeah,
remember.
that
I
was
think
me.
it you. There were a lot of people there. And one of my concerns was, that 5-year contract. Because what if we get it and for some reason, a year in, we decide, hey, this isn't working for us.
Yeah.
But we've already paid you, and I believe our quote's a little over $1 million. We've already paid you. So what happens?
So there is a service level agreement in place that ensures legally that we have to make sure that the system is functioning correctly. So that you are protected from that perspective. We can go down to 3 years because of 3 is as low as we can go. Most school districts go with 5 just because of the overall pricing of the term. Unfortunately, because of the volume of hardware that we have to deploy, it's a little bit different than an app where we do have a lot more overhead. So 3 is the least that we can go.
So we're paying for the full 3 years up front?
You can. That's what most school districts have done. Most school districts in Florida have paid 50% upfront and then 50% the following year.
On a 5-year contract?
But we can structure that how you want for your school district.
Okay, I don't like that one.
I think,
That I heard that I didn't think was,
I think in.
would our attorney have an opportunity to look at?
Yes,
that?
Yeah.
100%. And I'm not going to speak on the behalf of other school districts, but my understanding is that over the last year, one of the reasons, both inside Florida and outside Florida, that a lot of school districts elected to pay for it upfront, or as much of it upfront as possible, is that they were able to leverage some ESSER funds.
Use some of the ESSER funds?
Yeah.
Are we able to do that also? Scott's
Well,
right
we have,
behind you.
oh. Copies of the
I'm
quote.
waiting on them to bring them to me. I'd have to check to see, but if other districts are using it for ESSER, I don't see a reason why we could.
And we have ESSER dollars that we could use for that. So that's the only reason it would make sense.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of that over the last 2 years.
Sure.
Now, from an implementation standpoint, let's say we move forward with this. I mean, we've got a big school district, a lot of campuses, a lot of places. What does that timeline look like in a reasonable format to be able to hit all these campuses? And for example, how much time are you spending on one campus to get these every 50
Yeah.
feet and everything else? I mean, it's a lot of manpower to get that up and running, to your point.
It is. It takes approximately a day on average to install one school.
Yeah.
We have multiple crews that we put in. A school district your size, we could do it very reasonably. We could do it within 90 days. If you want to be conservative, we could say 120 days. In all honesty, we can usually typically go a little bit faster than the school districts can. We kind of, especially if you're not installing during the summer, if you're installing during the school year, we try to come in the evenings, not obviously disrupt classes. So 90 to 120 days is a very fair estimate.
I guess you're probably helped because you don't really have wiring.
Correct. It makes it And the other thing that really helps with is, I know that there's a lot of IT projects that you consider, and so vendors are gonna say, here's our price, and you have to go back to IT, and IT has to say, okay, well, we have to uplift that by 50% because we need to go buy all these other things. There's nothing additional that has to be purchased, so there's no additional servers, there's no additional switches, there's no additional wiring, right? This is all completely self-contained.
What happens if a teacher forgets their badge?
If a teacher forgets it or loses it,
Either.
either one. So there'll be some extra badges, and so at the school level, if the teacher goes and requests it, they can assign them a temporary badge. If someone loses their badge, both at the school level and at the corporate IT level, you can go in and disable their badge. And it takes just 30 seconds. It's a very, very simple process. And then you can reassign that badge.
Could their ID be attached to this badge?
Because of the thickness of the badge and the way most badge printers work, we would not be able to. So ideally, what we would do is start punching a hole in the top of their district-issued ID, and they would sandwich together. They would just sit together on one lanyard that they would wear.
Not be laminated, but it would just be on top of each other.
Right, so it would be taking this, punching a hole in it, and hanging in front of that one on one neck.
One neck, yeah.
Yep.
'Cause
What's the
eventually
life
we-
cycle of one of these?
So those badges will last 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
As long as you are a customer.
Yeah.
So say you decided to go for 3 years, maybe
Yep.
you continue, those badges will be replaced. So you have the ability to monitor them, IT does, and we have the ability to monitor them as well. Once they get down to a certain level, then we just recycle them.
Then what about after 5? Let's say we did 5, then we re-upped. Would all the hardware be good? We just need to replace some batteries, and then would that all be covered in
Correct.
a maintenance contract or something
All
else? or-
all these batteries are completely covered. We ship out the batteries, and typically, your maintenance
Sure.
team would replace the
Reasonable.
batteries.
Okay,
We can discuss it the other way, but it's more cost
That makes
effective for you guys
sense.
to do it.
okay.
So if we did an initial contract with you for 3 or 5 or ever how many years we decide, at the end of that period, and we liked it and wanted to re-up, because we have all the hardware now, is the second upping less expensive?
So it's a subscription-based service.
Okay.
So it is an annual subscription, minimum of 3 years, up to 5 years. The one benefit, we operate on what's called hardware as a service. So we actually own the hardware. It's our hardware, it's our responsibility to make sure it keeps working. What that also means is that as we develop new hardware and come roll out new hardware, as it needs to be replaced, you don't have to pay for that.
Okay. So pretty much the subscription is whatever it is. Gotcha.
So this shows like $1.6 million for 5 years. So the second 5-year term would still be like 1.6 million.
Yes, after that first initial term, you can go annual after that.
Will be less because you're not gonna have all of the.
You're not gonna have the initial
Seems like
installation.
there's not a lot less. The set
Yeah.
installation was only 138,000. Implementation was 69,000. On-site training was 23,000. So
It's gonna be like 1.5 or something.
Yeah.
Oh, and I had another question. I read, or maybe I heard you say, I'm not sure, but somewhere, I recall that it said that all the training was remote. Is that true?
Not anymore.
Okay.
We used to do that. Now we do all of our training in person, which is why there's a line item for that on there.
Okay, so someone would come and train us?
Yes. So what we do is we train.
How
Yeah.
much?
So you're now certified to train. We train.
How with that contract?
We train the administrators, and so that is typically the people who are on the security team who are going to be managing the system. We'll train the people who are responsible for assigning badges. Again, these are very simple tasks, but who's assigning badges. Then we'll train the response teams, and we do that ourselves directly. We try to do it in as few locations as possible. We can go to each school. Then we provide train-the-trainer material. Most school districts want to incorporate that training into their regular training, because it's an ongoing process, right? So we typically don't train the teachers, but we'll provide all the material to train the teachers.
And you communicate with our IT department and our, okay.
Yep, fully.
How many instances of like a false report has been generated?
I'm not going to say it never happens.
Sure.
I don't have an accurate number, so I don't want to give you one, but I can tell you that the most common reason for a false alarm is something that's real, but it's not a lockdown. So I'll give you an example. There was a teacher the last week of school in Hillsborough County. A student stayed after class, confronted the teacher, turned into a physical confrontation, and you can see it on camera, the chief there showed me, where the student was just beating the daylights out of the teacher. And so the teacher grabbed their badge, you could see it on camera, and they pushed it too many times, so they put that school into lockdown. Response team came, literally dragged the kid off of the teacher. That's, I guess, if you can call it a good accidental lockdown, that would be considered a good accidental lockdown. That's a more extreme version, but that's usually when you're going to have an accidental lockdown, is when a staff member is panicking because something really bad is happening, so they just keep pressing that button over and over again. I am not aware of any incidents of it going off because someone put it in their pocket or their purse or anything like that. If you notice the badge, that button is engineered to be below. It's not flush. You can turn it upside down and put it on the desk and push on it. It's not going to press that button. You have to press it at least 3 times, and then it vibrates. And then to do a lockdown, you have to keep pressing it. From a technical perspective, it's 8 times. But you have to be very, very intentional in order to trigger that.
4 or
lockdown.
5 is not going to trigger a lockdown.
No,
It's
it's
that
8.
intentional.
Yeah.
Well, and I just picture sticking my cell phone in a camping chair cup holder, and then it calls 911, right? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm on the phone with the officers, right?
And so it will not work off campus.
Okay.
The way that we do it, it's proximity based, so it will work, for argument's sake, let's say 50 or 100 feet off campus. So if you're on the sidewalk or something like that, but it's not going to work, at the Dunkin' Donuts down the street when your kid's playing with it in the back seat. That won't work. This one badge will work across every single campus, and there's nothing that staff member needs to do, right? It's smart enough to know when they push that button, which equipment is it close to, which campus is that, and who should they notify based on that campus. Really important question that hasn't been asked yet. This does not track teachers, right? If this is a passive technology, this is not tracking teachers as they walk through the building. Neither your IT or our company has the ability to see who has this badge and where they are. They have to push the button in order to report their location. It was designed like that on purpose, obviously.
How often do you check the system? I apologize.
Go ahead, that's okay.
We have millions of data checks every single day. It's one of the reasons for that gateway is so that we can manage all of our equipment. So someone right now, this one's not connected, but someone would know what the battery life is, how fast it's draining, when it needs to be replaced.
Would you know the same of the badges then, too?
The badges, they only check in approximately every 8 hours, and it changes. There's an algorithm to change it so that we can make sure that if we hit someone off of a schedule, that we're still going to be able to find that badge. And all it does is make sure that the badge is checked in and find out what the actual battery life is, just to see if it's been on
So
a
you would
campus.
know before we would, like if I'm a teacher, I don't know that my badge is.
As a teacher, you don't know. The IT department can get a badge report, and it will just show you everybody's badges and what the battery life is, last time it's checked in, and then we can see that on our side as well.
And that's when they're on campus is when it's doing that check.
Yep.
Okay.
When you say campus, does that include like this building and other office buildings?
We're literally discussing that right now.
Oh, okay.
Which is,
Actually, in the initial quote, it does include this as a facility.
Oh, okay, good.
So one of my plans is to incorporate maintaining a bunch of badges on site. So all of the district staff that visit campuses, maintenance, IT, safety and security, all of us will have those as well. So if we're on a campus and we see something, we also have the ability to protect those students and trigger those emergencies on campus, even though we're not assigned to that campus. And all those badges would live in a silo at the district level. And then anytime those maintenance workers, as they're constantly going to and from campuses, their ID is going to do a heartbeat check to those devices when they're on a campus, so we'll still be able to track the IDs, but they'll be siloed at the district office so that I can manage those and keep track of them.
Say school officers are going to have these.
Yes, they would be one of the school-based staff that would get it, and then all of the guardians at all of the other locations as well.
But you wouldn't give it to the SRDs or SROs, right? Or would you?
They're going to be a responder. They're more likely to be responding than initiating.
But if you wanted to lock down,
Yeah, if you wanted to lock down, that would be the advantage.
We recommend giving it to SRDs and SROs,
you do.
and that's included.
And that's included.
That's included.
Okay.
It seems like the only drawback that I see is just the ability to know what the emergency is, right? So if I press this, you don't know whether there's a medical emergency or whether I've just got a kid running off campus
Yep.
or.
Yeah, that's correct. So in the initial iterations of this, we had a different device that had 3 different buttons because we went down that exact same path, right? We have one for medical, we have one for you need SRO style help, and then you have another one you have to press all 3 of them to do the lockdown. What we ended up finding is that when you give people options, they either don't press anything or they press the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So that was an issue that we were trying to, figure out how to engineer around. But then what we heard from principals, they said, look, my SRO has emergency first aid training. And so if it's a medical alert and you're only notifying the nurse, the SRO might be closer. And so I just want you to notify our response team. The number one priority is get there as quickly as possible that you can triage. So that's how we designed the system.
I think it would be important for the district to develop protocols and procedures around this sort of event that, I guess in a medical emergency, this wouldn't necessarily take the place of you calling 911 to get an ambulance on the way, right? But you
Correct.
might press it and then,
Yeah. And
what
I can
would
give
be-
you a perfect example, which we discussed very briefly at FSBA, but in Lee County, Mia Santiago, she's a 17-year-old in high school. It was the first couple weeks of class. Right after the Pledge of Allegiance last year down in Fort Myers, she collapsed and coded. Teacher didn't know what to do. She pressed her button a bunch of times. Response team came, grabbed an AED, and they started doing chest compressions on her. They did chest compressions for over 15 minutes before EMS got there. But they were able to get there, triage the situation, intervene. They saved her life. But those kind of things, talking through what does what does an alert mean and who should we send and what should their response protocol be? We've got some best practice that we've seen at other schools, so we're happy to share that. But ultimately, you can customize those for your district.
yeah, that'd probably be a helpful starting point for developing those procedures. And maybe there's some non-examples in there as well of times you don't press it.
Yeah.
You know.
So the easy example of that is when we do our training, we don't recommend it when you're teaching them about a staff alert that you use the word behavioral, because everybody has a different version of what behavior means, right? And so we use physical altercation, we use medical emergency, that sort of thing.
So one of the things that I wanted to cover was initially the cost kind of looked scary to me too. I'm always trying to save us money, and so that was one of those where I was felt like I was choking on a dry cracker. But ultimately, we have 8 schools rather in the district that have severe network connectivity issues for cellular. We have probably 5 campuses that on at least 70% of their campus, they have no cellular signal. And then any large buildings, when you get to the interior walls, because of the way SREF building standards are, when you get to the interior areas, science labs and the classrooms in the middle at Gray Middle, there's no cellular coverage. So if we stay with an app-based solution, those people are completely unable to use it and don't trust it. Because I have to be in the media center next to this window or my cell phone doesn't work. I've been researching over the last couple of years in conjunction with Dwayne and the other team in IT, the cost for us to overcome those issues would be significantly more than this contract. Cellular distributed antenna systems to get cellular inside those buildings, hundreds of $1,000s per building, not per campus, per building on the campus. They are incredibly expensive because the cellular companies don't want to share their decryption technology for their signal. So to get those in place is very expensive. So it's very hard for us to overcome those challenges. The other option is to roll it over onto our Wi-Fi and make like a Wi-Fi 911. But now everybody in the district cell phone that joins that, now all their data is going through our internet, and we have privacy issues. We have all kinds of problems that brings up. This checks a lot of the boxes, and it gives us a lot of the functionality we wanted to try and make happen with Fusus, which is our partnership with the Sheriff's Department. This fixes a lot of the not shortcomings, but just things that we wish it could do that it can't. And it does it in a way that takes a lot of the load off of us to maintain the hardware and keep up with all of that. It keeps us from having to add additional staffing to maintain those large systems. And it really is, when you think about what it would cost to try and get to the same thing, and just to have every school have the ability to use the app, would be very high. And he's not far off on his averages. We're better than most. We've got about 18% adoption of staff, but even that is not that high. This, we immediately, because it's not a personal device, it's not anything like that, we can get 100% adoption on day one. And that, more eyes is better. And then this in conjunction with the public safety channel and the radios where they can talk straight to 911. If it was a medical emergency, they can manage those things with all the other tools that we give them really, really well. So it lets us address a lot of those concerning campuses really quickly, and in all actuality, probably in the most affordable way.
So as soon as I hit my button, it's going to begin to track me. When does it stop?
60 seconds.
60 seconds.
So it tracks you for 60 seconds.
So if somebody's not here in 60 seconds, I I hit my button again.
You can, I mean, if you, no, sorry, that, your location will show up and it will stay there after 60 seconds, wherever you are, that's where it's gonna pin it on that map. And so that's where responder is gonna come to where that location is. If you move, because I can't think of a scenario, but if you're moving throughout the school, you can press a button again and it's gonna pop up again and again, show where you are at that time.
Well, if I'm in a situation where I'm with a child that's confrontational.
Right.
We could be walking and I need help.
Then you would continue to press your button, yes. The,
I think every time we do this.
And it gives that ability.
Well, it would show you moving too for the 60 seconds.
It would show you for the first 6, and the reason for that is,
So then you
what
can
happens is, the first time you press that button, it's automatically checking, and it's
Yeah.
gonna pick up on whatever the closest equipment is.
Yep.
We don't want to delay, because you can wait 99 tenths of a second before you click it again, before it resets. So we don't want to wait 3 seconds before we start reporting. So we start tracking it right away. As soon as you hit three presses, it's going to say, okay, this is a real alert, and it's going to notify based on wherever the initial location was. After 60 seconds, because maybe you're in between here and out there, or maybe you're walking down the hallway, it's going to track you for those 60 seconds. After that 60 seconds, it's going to solidify it and say, this is where the response team needs to go to. The reason we didn't do active tracking after that is that there's a very real scenario in a medical emergency where you find a child and you press your button, then you need to go get help. And you don't want the response team tracking you, because if you're able to go get help, you're able to press your button and have that child that's there unattended, right? So that was the intent of having the response team go to the scene of the crime, as it were.
Now then, if multiple people press their button at the same time, then it would pick up all those for 60 seconds.
Yep.
Okay.
And you'd start to see more of
Yeah,
those
the
red dots
clusters or
lighting up on the
whatever.
map.
And they stay on until a response team member comes and closes that
Got
alert.
it.
One of the things that we didn't talk about is the reporting capability. So every time someone presses their button, we record, who pressed it. This is not anonymous, so it's a very good training opportunity, right? So that we know who pressed this button. We know the date, timestamp. We know what campus they were on and where inside the campus. We know who responded to it, who closed it, and how long it took them to do that. And when they close it, and you can select who has permission to close it. Just because someone gets notified on the response team, you may want only principals to close it, right? So you can configure that. When they close it, they have to choose a specific category. They can't choose other. So there's very specific categories, and you can customize those categories. But what it gives you is the ability to pull a report across all your different schools. And so we actually have school districts who, in their quarterly board retreat, they will look at the incident reports across all the different schools, and they'll see one school, hey, this particular school has behavioral issues that are way more significant than the other ones. It allows them to dig into that data and just kind of understand what's happening at that school.
The other thing I'll tell you is that you mentioned earlier about false alarms. I have no idea how, but on the app, we get tons of false alarms, which to launch that alert, you have to unlock your phone, then open the alert app, then hold down a specific button for 3 seconds, then confirm it before it triggers. And somehow, we had about a month and a half ago, I got 9 calls in 2 minutes from the same lady's purse.
Wow.
And so we get a lot of false alerts from a phone app, which I do not understand how that, statistically, it should be almost impossible, but it happens all the time, so it's not. But we get a lot of those. And unfortunately, with the nature of an active shooter alert coming in to me or to Joseph or to anybody else, we see that and we're like, okay, well, my initial reaction is if it's real, I don't want to call them because I don't want their phone going off if they're hiding. And so it's like, okay, well, maybe I'll send a discreet text message. But if it's in their purse getting triggered, they don't get the text message. So now we're in this thing where like, okay, do I send help or do I? And so those false alarms tend to be very concerning just because we have no way of knowing. And I don't want to not respond to the real one because I have false alarm fatigue. And so this really gives us a lot more granularity in what's happening, how it's happening, but it also protects from that some because it's an ID and it doesn't happen when they're at Fazoli's. It only happens if they're on campus. And so if it's accidentally triggered from home, it's not going to be a problem for us.
So you're going to confirm with US or not? So we'll come out of that.
Does LCEA have an opinion? Have they had the opportunity to look at the app?
Kathy?
I did. I met with them and discussed it with them, so if yeah.
Okay,
You're good?
thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank you. I
Thank
only
you.
heard a portion of your presentation, but I was very impressed, and I wanted my fellow board members to hear, so thank you for coming.
I've got 2 more quick ones, if you don't
Sure,
mind.
yeah.
admin building, what were the two that we had configured into this quote, or what was the rationale on including some, and like, what's the line on what should be included?
So I believe
campus and
one
what's
was
not?
for the district office,
Yeah.
just because of the number of
Yeah,
employees and
agreed.
how many of them also go to schools.
Absolutely.
And to give us that extra silo for district-level personnel. And then the other one was Howie. Because we do so many trainings there, in the event that we had a lot of staff there and something happened, they would have the ability again to trigger that emergency.
Yeah.
And plus, having that when they're off-site for trainings and things like that.
Yep.
Really kind of gets them used to keeping it with them wherever they go, because then it works wherever they are.
No, I agree. And then on the breakdown, is there any thought into the annual, or I'm sure there's thought into it, but the annual rate of 7,000 per campus regardless of the size or
Yeah, so
scope of that?
the breakdown is actually, we've got a breakdown now for elementary school, middle school, high school, but
Yeah.
any school district that's got more than 5 schools, a blended rate is what makes most sense. And actually, that rate, what is the? annual-
7,000 per site.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's usually 8.
gonna say
There's
it should be 4.
there's a pre-negotiated rate with FLDOE.
Okay.
We don't have to get into all what that was last year, but we have a pre-negotiated rate that was based on the entire state. And so we decided to honor that.
Got it.
Because they decided to break it up and go different vendors.
Yeah.
So you guys get the benefit of that.
And then with the compliance piece from the state for Alyssa's alert participation, is there a portion that you guys have already calculated in?
There's a portion for what the FLDOE has already committed to for 22, 23, and then 23, 24 that I believe is a line item in there. Yeah, and
Yes.
if there's more, there's a mechanism to credit you guys back. If it's less for those 2 years, that's on us. It's not gonna be less, but that's on us. We've already committed to that. And then if there, whatever additional that they provide in years after that, we credit to you as well.
Thank you.
Yes, that's a fancy way of saying they pay that directly to us.
I get it.
We'll figure
You
it out.
do any updates or upgrades
Mhm.
during the contract period for free?
That's correct.
New hardware, replacement hardware, everything is included in that.
The only, I guess, caveat to that would be if there's brand-new functionality and features that is new capability, then it would be an opportunity for you guys to participate in that. It just depends on what it is.
Any other questions, board?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Cunningham. Thank you for coming.
All right,
We appreciate
thank
it
you,
very
everybody.
much.
Thank you for all the time.
I was just going to say that, I know he talked about the implementation probably being 90 to 120 days. Joseph and I have discussed it. I know some of the hurdles that we're going to have with IT. We had a great guinea pig from Spring Creek already having adopted this, so we already know some of the IT hurdles we have to clear. I've already provided the information to IT so they can start looking at what it would take on a district-wide implementation. Joseph and I recommend that we still plan, because we already have a compliance piece in the Fusus Alert app. There's not a rush for a fear of non-compliance. So we would say, get this in place, do our training, test it, shake it out, make sure it's good, and then roll over to the new system in January.
Are you gonna offer this to, can we offer it to all of our charters?
Absolutely. We've already spoken with several of them, and quite a few of them have expressed interest.
And-
And
and-
whatever this rate is.
Yeah,
Go into that.
there's 2 different scenarios. They're either sort of a regular school, which their pricing would be higher, so we would extend your pricing to them, or they're a tiny, tiny little school, in which case we would have to do some custom pricing for them.
Maybe they reach out.
Yep.
When you say charter, you talking about just the conversions or charters in the area? You're talking about all of them? Is
We would
that-
offer it to all of them, specifically because it alleviates some of the stress at the sheriff's department. I spoke with Captain Martin earlier today about this, just in case anybody had any questions, and reached out to them. Because of the way they have to monitor in the PSAPs, and because we have several municipalities that run their own 911 centers throughout the county, all of them will need to be monitoring it for the schools in their municipality, because that's where the 911 calls will be going to. By everybody having the option to move into the system, it really alleviates the pressure on them to monitor multiple systems. They can focus in on having one thing that they're monitoring, which improves response times. So we definitely want to offer to everybody. Obviously, we can't make them do it, but a lot of them tend to follow what we're doing, because we really do push everybody to go to the next level, so.
Well, thank you for your research and your input. You
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
Excellent. You guys can keep those badges, too. Thank you.
At the
Have our
direction,
badge?
Yeah, you can have your badge.
at the direction of the board, we'll have Mr. Johnson to review the contract, and we'll confirm the funding source and then bring it back to the board.
The only thing that, from what I heard, if we do it with Esther, then it makes sense to do it up front. If it's out of capital, you said you motion.
Yes. On terms. Yes, yeah. Payment terms, yeah.
That we would look at the terms of it's out of capital. That's what I would say.
Okay.
Does everybody agree?
Yeah,
Excellent.
absolutely.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Safe travels back. Thank you for coming in, and we'll be back in touch with you.
Okay, are we going back to 3.01? Is that where you'd like to go?
Yes.
Great.
Good afternoon, Board. Can we pull up the budget one first? Yes, sir. Thank you. Okay, we're putting the budget together. We're in that part of the time of the year where we're crunching everything in and getting it out. I wanted to give some updates on some of the changes and some of the things that are different this year, how we're putting it together. And then also remind you that a lot of these documents are already on our website, so you can pull them up and review them. And obviously, we're always available for conversation and questions or anything else that concerns you may have. So let's talk a little bit about the 2021-22 year, where we always want to start where we ended the last year. Of course, fund balance is always a big thing. This is still preliminary, and it's preliminary because we're still running a payroll today that we're going to post back, accrual back to last year, and we may still have some other large accounts payable items that need to be accrued back. So these numbers will probably change before you see our annual financial report coming up soon. But what you can see is in 2022, the preliminary, our non-spendable, about 1.6 million, restricted funding of 15.9. Our restricted funding continues to trend higher, and one of the reasons why is because a lot of the items that are typically in your restricted funds are also the same items that are covered under ESSER. So as we shift those things over to ESSER, they're impacting our restricted funds more than they are our unrestricted funds. Assigned, just estimating based off of last year's number, and then about 43 million in unassigned fund balance. So if you were going to calculate that fund balance ratio today, it's almost at 12%. We think it's going to trend up a little bit higher because we think we have a little bit more revenue coming in at the end of the year. But that gives you an idea of about what our fund balance is doing at the year end. I always like to cover the health insurance fund. I think it's important for you guys to know where we are on that because of the problems we've had back in the past. Claims expense is about 49.7 million. So that in the current year, so that's about an average day claim of $136,000 per day. Our ending fund balance is projected to be 12.9, which is about 94 and a half days. And remember, 60 days is our target. It's what's required by the state, so we're well above that. There's some budget highlights for this year. We have a $214 increase in the base student allocation, a $4.3 million increase in the teacher salary enhancement supplement, $3.4 million in the funding, the total funding compression allocation. Remember last year it was zero because it's always based on the previous year. So that was restored back to this year, so it's $3.4 million more. One of the big things that we've been pushing for, finance officers in the state, is the FDOE was not allowing us to adjust our categorical funding. Remember, our categorical funding includes scholarships. And so when they pull the scholarships out, they were pulling out 100% unrestricted funding from us. And so what we were arguing for was, or asking for, was allow us to adjust our categorical balances back for those that were removed through the scholarships. And so at the last Florida School Finance Officers Association, Florida Department of Education said that we were now allowed to make that adjustment. So we're going to start making that adjustment. So that allows us, in the current year, that's about $1.5 million that was restricted. That's now moving to unrestricted. So one of the things that goes along with the FEFP calculation this year with the statute, with the implementing language, is we have to move to the $15 per hour minimum wage. I know we've all talked about that as a board, but I thought publicly we would mention that again. And there's no proposed increase in the board's contribution to health insurance. There's no proposed increase to the employee either. So we're holding our health insurance contributions the same for next year because we still have more surplus more than the 60-day requirement. And then a moderate increase in Florida Retirement System contribution this year, so. Some school operating budget highlights. We added an additional band funding for middle and high school students. In the past, we've always given them a flat rate band for each high school and middle school. And so they were asking for some additional dollars mid-year. We made an adjustment, budget amendment this last year. So what we did, though, instead of giving them all a flat amount per school, we looked at how many students they had enrolled in a band-style class, and then we gave them $10 per student enrolled. So if they have a band that participates more, a school that participates more with band, and they have more students, they got more funding. The $1,000 last year, if you recall, I rolled that into the general, and the board had concern. So this year, we rolled it back out, so it's separated out. So that money's restricted only for the robotics and any kind of STEAM funding that their school's going to participate in. So that money got separated back out. High school athletic transportation, that had not been adjusted for a long period of time. Some of our schools that have been around for a while have added a lot of sports, and they weren't getting the funding to go along with that. So we kind of looked at this last year, coming up with a mechanism to equate that back out to where it was equal per all schools. And what we come up with was we're going to give $1,750 per sport that a school has participants in. So if a sport has enough participants, it's a team, then they get $1,750. So if they got a boys and a girls, they'll get $1,750 for both. So for each one of the sports that are sanctioned under Florida High School Athletics Association. We did have some questions about, well, what do you do if they have a team, but it's a very small amount? So what we told them is they have to have at least 5 students to make up a team. And if they have a boys sport and a girls sport, and either one of them don't have enough to make 5, we'll let them add the boys and girls together, and if they come up to 5, that makes a team. So that kind of gives them an ability to have the funding for them in place. We really didn't add a lot of funding to the larger high schools that were already being funded adequately. This really helped out a lot of the schools that haven't received funding as they've grown in the past 8 or 9 years. And then we also added additional funding for performance arts based on the number of students enrolled. So each one that had students enrolled in chorus, dance, or theater class, they got $10 per student based on what the current enrollment was in the previous year. And then last year, we added $10 per student, and we gave that to the schools to use at their discretion. This year, what we're proposing is pulling that back, and it still will be set aside for the schools, but instead of them using it at their discretion, they're going to have to come up with a spending plan and give a purpose on how they're going to spend that funding, and they're going to have the superintendent review that and approve that before they can spend it. It's not necessarily going to be $10 per student. It may be even more. Some schools may not have the need, or they may not have a sufficient plan. So the idea is once these plans have been submitted by the schools, the superintendent can approve them, and then once they're approved, we'll bring out a quarterly report for the board so that you can see how much was allocated to school, how they're spending it, and what they're spending it on. Any questions before I go on? We increased last year $10, their base student budget. We're taking that back, and then we're setting it aside. So we're going to require them to come up with a plan before we give them that funding.
So I can appreciate all the conversation we've had on this already, because I think it answered a lot of questions. So I'm not going to jump into the weeds and ask all those again, but just one thing that had come up through dialogue was I'm interested in what sort of guidance you all be providing as a district when it comes time to dispersing that athletic transportation from a principal's perspective. If they end up using the full amount, in the fall, what's left for your spring sports, or is there some assurance that, hey, your lesser teams, since we as a district are giving you $1,750 because of your existence, are you entitled to use potentially up to $1,750 to travel?
It's per team then, right?
Right, but it's provided to the school in a lump sum. And so for instance, if I'm let's say the tennis team, I generated $1,750 based on this formula, but now me as the principal, am I required to give $1,750 to the tennis team to travel?
It's categorical, right? It's per
The per team amount is how they calculate the total amount, but once we give them the total amount, in the past, the principals have had discretion on how they're going to spend it. So what we would have to do, and it may not be $17.50 per team, but what we'll have to do to explain to the principals is, these are the teams that earn some type of transportation funding. You need to ensure that each team has some kind of coverage.
I think we like the state of Florida, that you go to this person, and they will tell you exactly how you have to spend it.
Do we have reason to think that some teams have not been adequately funded for travel?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I
My
think.
kids participated on.
Well, I think it depends on the sport, it depends on the need, depends on what's traditionally been done in the past. Obviously, football has a lot of travel, basketball has a lot of travel, baseball has a lot of travel, but like golf teams, you know, sometimes they can handle that just with parents. Lacrosse is the same. I know some teams that play lacrosse, at times, the parents have to do the travel. Sometimes they provide buses. So it's really been at the principal's discretion, but I think we can provide some direction to, you need to make sure that everybody has some type of coverage. Yeah. All right. Department budget highlights. We did add $1.4 million to transportation based on current expenditure amount. Remember, we're talking about the addition from original budget last year to original budget this year. We had already made some increases in transportation to cover their fuel budget, because obviously the increase in fuel was much more than what they had budgeted. On top of that, we set aside $1.2 million that's going to be outside of their budget, just in case if they need it. So if they run through their fuel budget, fuel prices continue to increase, we've got there if they need it. But what we didn't want to do is increase their regular budget by another $1.2 million. We moved $110,000 of equipment from safety and security budget. The idea being that some of this is going to be reimbursed by capital expenditures. So we wanted to pull that equipment purchase outside of their budget to kind of separate the two, so you guys could look at that and say, okay, this is the portion that's going to get reimbursed by capital, and this is the portion that's going to cost us in operational. We did the same thing with IT computer repair and replacement. We pulled the big refreshes out of their normal budget and put it in their repair budget, so that you can kind of see what E-rate or capital may be reimbursing for those purchases. And any questions on that before I move on? Okay. District-wide budget highlights. You'll see a large increase in our budget, obviously, and both in revenue and expenditures. And I just wanted to point out a couple of things. One being the McKay scholarships and the family empowerment scholarships. This is the amount that flowed through the district, so the money actually doesn't come to us. They take it away from us at the DOE level, but it's part of our FEFP revenue, and then we show an expenditure going out. So we budget that revenue coming in, and we budget that expenditures going out, even though it's not actually an expenditure of the district. We do that to just protect that budget so we don't spend it somewhere else. And so when the scholarships are pulled from us, we've got money set aside for it. And then also a $1.3 million increase in the base student allocation for VPK, which is great. But we also increased their budget by $1.3 million because their revenue went up. So we just wanted to make you aware of that. And then one of the new things is the $1.8 million for the dual enrollment, the extra additional FTE that was earned through dual enrollment that wasn't there in the past. So we increased their budget for the amount that they projected to earn based on how much they earned last year and how much they're going to earn in the upcoming year. So that's just kind of district-wide, some differences. And then the last thing is the district transparency webpage, and they're going to click on that for us real quick, just to let you and the general audience know that we have the tentative budget summary on there, which is kind of that one pager of all of our budget summary. And then we have our interactive tentative budget, where you can go in and select your school or your fund or your project or anything like that and see what expenditures are budgeted for you. School operating budget, department budget summary, and can you scroll down a little bit? And then the department project budget request. Just like last year, you can click on that and you can see exactly what the detail of each project or each department requested in their budget. And then the final thing is just a conference report comparison to the fourth calc of the FEFP calculation. So any questions on that part? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly at this point in time for the capital. She's got better fun stuff than I do.
Scott says, I get the fun part of this presentation. So I was actually afraid there for a little bit that it wasn't going to be very fun, but I think everything is working out better than I hoped it would a month or two ago. So just a reminder, our capital plan timeline is set by the interlocal agreement for school concurrency. It says that we will provide the final draft to the local governments by August 15th and adopt it by September 15th. Also, these are our revenue sources for capital. We have our ad valorem, our impact fees, and our sales tax proceeds, and all of those have restrictions, except for the ad valorem on how we can use them. So we try to make sure that we are spending the right kind of money on the right projects. So this year, some of our challenges, I don't think any of these will really take you by surprise. But inflation, the supply chain issues, and labor shortages have resulted in increased costs for construction programs. Pending recession, I don't know whether it's coming. If I did, I probably wouldn't be, I'd be charging a whole lot to consult for people. If you asked me yesterday, I'd say yes, there definitely was. I read an article this morning that says, well, there's no sign of it yet. So we're always kind of balancing that fine line on what's going to happen, and that results in uncertain revenue for us. Sales tax and impact fees. Our ad valorem tends to be pretty steady, so that is a positive. And, we're always walking a fine line between being too pessimistic in our capital plan and not promising enough, and then being too optimistic and over-promising. So some of my goals in doing the capital plan this year were to set realistic revenue projections, not be overly optimistic and not be under optimistic, I guess. Maintain some stable spending on the annual expenditures, address those budget increases that we're seeing in our major projects, and then to really just to try to keep everything on track, to keep all new projects and modernizations funded in the same year, even though the costs have increased beyond what the revenue has increased. So on our revenue side, we are seeing a steady increase in property tax revenue. It's set at 1.5 mil. It's basically when it increases, it's just because we have a larger pool of value out there. And so that the projected impact fee revenue is increased. I will tell you, so last year we had budgeted for 18 million. For impact fees, we actually collected closer to 30 million. I don't necessarily think that trend is going to continue. There's a lot of unknown factors. Costs are increasing, interest rates are increasing, and so I have tried to be fairly conservative in that. I projected 22 million for this coming year and then bumped it back down. If we do continue to collect a larger impact fee amount, then, that will be addressed as we go through the project. But again, that's kind of not over-promising what we're doing. Once a project hits the third year of the capital plan, then it becomes a promise to the community and to the developer, and that impacts our school concurrency process as well. So, we're almost kind of balancing that. We are collecting proportionate share mitigation agreements for 3 areas, North County high school capacity, South County high school capacity, and then we have some agreements that are out there for Northwest County, Leesburg area elementary school. Since some of our projects that will increase capacity have rolled into the third year, we are no longer doing those agreements because the capacity is there, but we are still collecting some of that funding. Again, the sales tax revenue has been fairly stable, and we are not getting any more money from the state, so there's no PICO. We get some CONDS, but about half of that each year is bonded, and so we don't actually see that. And so our total revenue projected for this year is $548 million, and that does include $90 million in carryover. So that's money that we've saved up that we will start spending on projects, or that we are already spending on projects. So revenue projections, are there any questions on the revenue projections? Okay. The ongoing expenditures, pretty much no change from last year. We did add the security assets transfer to the general fund, and that is largely hardware purchases at $150,000 per year. So any questions on ongoing expenditures? Nope, okay. Well, this is always the fun part of this program. So our capital projects, new capacity, we have the Mineola Area Relief K-8 is funded. In 22-23, we have increased that budget to reflect the increases in construction costs. We are still striving to open it in 2024. I will say there are some constraints that I fear will push that off to 2025, but our goal is still 2024. We have the projects that we had discussed last year to add additions at Villages Elementary and Windy Hill Middle School. Those, I managed to keep them in the same place, and that's impact fee funding. And then we'll continue building funding for the South County High School. And we can talk about that a little bit more when we talk about land acquisition. So some exciting things. Aurelia Cole Academy is under construction. I just got a report that the crane should be there at the end of this month, and they are already pouring the tilt walls. So we'll see some real progress on that school here hopefully pretty soon, and that's always a fun time. Fruitland Park Elementary School, the RFQ for an architect has been published. And so that selection should take place in August, and then we will very quickly follow it with a CM so that we are able to, construction manager, so that we're able to have that, that interaction between the two, and the construction manager can help with the cost effectiveness of that project. And we believe that we are still on track for opening in 2024, pending any unforeseen issues. The sales tax projects, the renovations, the Beverly Shores renovation, it's funded for design this year, so we will be putting that out for design probably in the spring. And then again, following that with a construction manager, because that construction is funded next year. So, so we'll start that process and do some of the assessments that we need to do. Eustis Elementary is funded. Eustis High School, last year we told you that instead of looking at Curtright, we would look at an addition at Eustis High School. And so we looked at the feasibility of that over this last year. We looked at the costs, and basically what we have discovered is that it is feasible. And that the cost of the addition, if it weren't for the cost increases, would actually have been less than the cost of a major rebuild at Curtright. But because of the cost increases, it's about what we had budgeted last year. So there's actually no increase in that project funding, but it will go to an addition instead of Curtright. And then as we get closer to that, we'll be developing the program for what will happen with Curtright.
I have a question. I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry. Curtright, is it going to still be a ninth grade center, or would it be some other purpose?
So it would be some other purpose to be determined
Okay.
by the board.
Does the Eustis community know about this?
We probably have not had in-depth conversations with
I
them.
would very strongly suggest that that's something that needs to happen sooner than later.
Okay,
There are some feelings, and that's not my district, but there are some feelings that run very deep
yes.
about that building, very similar to the ones in Claremont. So I would hate for us to get ourselves and catch them off guard.
Okay, we will certainly do that.
I'll reach out to them.
Yeah.
I've already spoken to, over the past couple of years about some possibilities, so I'll
Yeah.
circle back and make sure that they know that we'll work together, just like we've done with
Yeah.
the other communities on what educational purpose that might serve. I know we've got some ideas of what we might want to do with that facility, maintaining it as an educational.
Yeah, I think that would be
facility.
an excellent idea.
I'll
Yes.
do that right away.
Have we secured all property that uses elevator?
We have not. There is one house that is still remaining, and so we have had conversation with them, and I'm not sure how much detail I want to go into. Basically, we made them an offer based on the appraisal. It was not sufficient to cover a house that was equivalent in an area that they wanted to be in, and to cover their moving costs. And so they came back with a counteroffer that was significantly more. They have indicated that they are willing to consider another counteroffer. I am not sure that we can get there with them. So we can build around them. I mean, yeah.
I just don't want to be held hostage.
No. I mean, we, the option is that if we can't come to some kind of an agreement, then we can build around them.
And if we build around them, do we still have adequate space for playgrounds and parking and all that
I'll
stuff?
say it will always be a pretty tight site on
Okay.
Eustis Elementary.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
we will work around that. We still need to go back, and I'd like to have some real detailed conversations with the church
Okay.
there about maybe a long-term lease.
The little white
We
church in the
had-
back that we play in their, on part of their property now?
So St. Thomas
St.
Episcopal.
Thomas.
Yeah. They, we had leased their parking lot. We still do for overflow parking. And when we had talked to them a couple of years ago, they were not really interested in a long-term lease, but, things change. And so if that's an option, then that would be good, because at least we could build parking and retention on that. And it
Now
would give
there-
us a little bit more
Would there
space.
still be a street between the school and the parking?
So the city
I mean,
has
a road.
indicated that they would be willing to vacate that road. So we would have to go through that process with them. The one house that is remaining, they would still be able to get access off of, I think it's Citrus on the north side there. And so, that wouldn't cut off their access if we did vacate that road. But we have to do that application with the city and move forward with that.
Okay.
Right, and then, the last one, Oak Park and Middle School and Leesburg Elementary are partially funded in the last year of the plan. I was really kind of afraid that I was gonna have to drop somebody off, and so I was glad I was able to get them and actually increase their funding. One of the things that I did do is the sales tax allows for us to spend money on technology infrastructure upgrades and also on those major capital renewal projects. And neither of those are funded out of sales tax any longer. All of that has been moved to ad valorem. So sales tax right now is dedicated to these major projects. So that was one way I was able to keep them where they are. The major capital projects, the Eustis Middle School, Groveland Elementary, and Tavares Middle School were already funded. Astatula and South Lake High School were funded a year or so out. And one of the things that finance actually complained about was when I spread that funding across multiple years. So to their relief, I have stopped doing that. So I think that'll make it a little bit more efficient as well. And the outer year projects, we'd like to go through a process of doing major assessments on those and determining where that money is. So there's just still pools to be determined. And then last year, we had added the elementary playground replacements, and those have been removed because they have been covered by ESSER funding. Other things that have been added. High school athletic facility projects, there is $1 million in this first year for those, and I think those are still in determination on what that will look like. And then the high school turf replacement, there's $250,000 per year over the 5 years. And Scott, did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so we're aware of an opportunity to either do each one at the time, each year, or we could do all 5 based on a piggyback bid with a vendor. And so what the thought process there is you could do one field each for 5 years, or about the same funding stream. You could do all 5 fields, enter into a 5-year lease, and then the payments would come out to be about the same as the doing one field per year.
And we could get them all done at once.
Yes, ma'am. There is some interest rate cost to that. It's still low. Sorry?
Over 5 years?
It's 4 years, not 5.
Okay, sorry.
It's 4 years. It's, total interest in 4 years is $12,116.
And that's
That's gonna be per field.
That's per field. That, yeah.
Well, it depends on the site. Can I speak to that?
Sure, absolutely.
What I asked Mr. Carr to do is do an assessment of our fields, which is what you've got on the first page. So it comes to, this is just baseball, by the way, but it's, baseball, it's $441,000. So we would be into a 2-year program in order to get the same amount of work we do in 1 year. We get it all done. It also includes the maintenance of the fields, that we're proposing. And one thing I know about grass is it's all about the maintenance. Putting the grass down is one thing, and with them with a vested interest, it's their grass we're making maintenance, which one person look at for the initial installation, including irrigation, the maintenance component to it, and anything that mold is mowing the grass. So we won't have multiple vendors to put paint papers. And I think it gives us a better leverage. At the end of the 4 years, it simply belongs to us. We decide we do or not do maintenance.
So this cost is $441,000. In our capital plan, we've got $250,000 annually for 5 years.
So, yeah, we've got $441,000 to take care of these fields, is Mr. Carr's assessment. So we wouldn't be spending more than this.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So whatever it needs, this is all modeled on Mount Dora. And in Mount Dora, we have a proposal of $242,000 just for that field. And so anything, if you borrow less, then obviously the payments are less, or the need is less.
Right.
But the high end is this 242 at Mount Dora because it's a complete redo. Like, the field apparently is not safe, and so there's all this grading and new irrigation.
That's true.
And so that's the most expensive. And then you look down at what Mr. Carr came up with is he's got the 250 in there. I'm sorry, the 250 is in there. So it's another 141,000, basically.
So do we have the 141,000 that we could just move around in this plan so you eliminate the need for
Well, see, here's the thing with me. So I think as much magic as he does, I'm certain that we could pay for it, but it's beyond that for me. It is the maintenance component. And if
Right.
you owe somebody money on it, that it's worth 12 grand in total interest over 4 years for them to have to worry about it. And we don't have to have our people or contract it out, because we're in that right now, that Mr. Ward and I were at South Lake, which prompted some conversation about the company that's handling it now. And
JSM right now? Is that who we have?
It's JBH or J something.
It's JSM for.
JSM,
JSM for the field maintenance contract.
yeah.
And so-
And so
so-
there's going to be a savings, because we'll move the baseball fields away from them.
So they'll come off that JSM contract
Yes,
and they'll
sir.
move to this?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so some of that will then be operation dollars, the maintenance of those fields, right? And that
That-
paid for
yeah,
out of
so
the
that
grant
would be
budget?
accurate. I think.
Whenever we go to actually do this, the part that goes to capital will be just the lease payments, the principal and interest for the actual equipment and grass or whatever. The the maintenance part will still be coming out of the operation.
Okay. So we've got the 250,000 set aside for this year, 250,000 next year. So that will, I mean, well, every year for 5 years. So a portion of that would be the leasing on these fields. So I guess in this 5-year period, are we also looking at replacing other fields too, aside from the baseball?
Well, see, that's the
and
thing,
softball?
was we only did baseball.
Yeah.
And this would open us up to looking at all of our fields, in my opinion, and free us up some dollars. I think that's
So
actually
if
where
we
this
did
should go.
this, we could get all the baseball fields done and possibly start working on some of the other fields.
Correct. If this
the
model,
savings.
they have not done this before, Lake Jim, so this is new to them as well. And if it works to everyone's benefit, then why would we not broaden it out and look at our other fields that are in need, for sure.
So the goal would be to do all of our fields eventually.
Yes, ma'am.
But this 441 gets you all the baseball and softball. So I guess the next one on the list would be football. How many of, I guess some of them have been replaced recently, right?
The football, I don't know of any recent. The last time we did a complete redo was Lake Mineola, which was, and again, that's another case of, we spent 65,000,
Yeah.
and then the irrigation got turned off,
Yeah.
right? So,
So I assume looking at this, the city of Tavares pays for the fields in Tavares? Since it says city, it doesn't have. Are they own them?
I'm not familiar with that document.
Do they-
I didn't get a chance
Do
to
they,
look at that.
do they
piece of
own,
it.
the city of
Tavares
Tavares
does.
owns the baseball field?
well, this is Mount Dora we're looking at.
But I mean, on our thing here,
Oh,
it says Tavares City, so that means we don't have to, okay.
Yeah.
So I guess we've got to do some sort of vote to approve a contract from Lake Gem, and I guess I'm interested in knowing the terms of the contract currently with JSM, if we're, what that looks like for removing fields from that
I
contract.
think, is John here? Because he had a meeting with them.
He is here. I don't know if he's out in the lobby. There he is. He's usually right on the other side of that door.
And based on the size of this contract, are there any sort of requirements about the bidding process that has to
Yeah.
occur through this?
This is Orange County. It's an Orange
A
County. deal.
piggyback.
That's a big one.
We're talking about the
Grounds contract for
Mount
Lake Point
Dora
Academy?
specifically, but
Oh, no, Mount Dora.
overall picture.
Okay, sure.
And what did you ask, Mr.
Oh, so my question was, so we'd have to vote on some sort of contract from Lake Gem in order to enter into this agreement. And I was interested in the terms of removing fields from the JSM
Yes.
contract. So we'd have, so I don't know what those terms are.
You just met with them.
Yes, and that process is ongoing. So we met with them, the meeting that I had with JSM was talking about field condition and treatment of field. We have a new individual that's responsible for maintaining our fields now, and they're actually providing additional services at no charge to bring the fields back up to a better condition. Spare you what they're doing unless you want to know. But I figured. So then basically depending, obviously the way the contract is currently constructed, it's based on the high school fields. So once, if there is a deal that's procured with GEM, then obviously we would get into negotiating with JSM to clarify what they're doing and what they're not doing.
Okay.
If in fact, that contract's still in
We
place.
have an out that we can.
Yes,
Yeah, that's my
we
question.
always have an
In
out,
terms
as
of
as
we
Mr.
have-
Johnson points out, we, with all our contracts, we always have an out.
So we
It
just give
costs
them like
us
30 days notice?
It's a
or-
30-day.
I'm not sure if it's 30 or 60,
That
but
we
Mr.
can-
Johnson,
Huh? Just as a general rule, though, you always have either 30 or. Right,
Okay.
okay.
One question before
Yes,
you
ma'am.
go away. The Eustis, I know this, that it's been redone, so that means that we wouldn't have to include them and redo them because they already, a lot of stuff
that
was
would be
just
correct, and I
done.
think that was noted in there that it's
Yeah, it
not
says
applicable.
good and good.
But
Yeah, Well, I'm
but-
sorry,
but-
I did that, and Gary
Okay.
Rogers and I
Okay.
touched all the fields in 2 days.
But
I thought I
Lake Gym is actually handling the maintenance of those fields.
So they
since
will start to
provided-
take care of it.
So they already are, that was.
Oh,
That
okay.
is correct.
Well, they look good.
Well, thank you.
They look
I-
better
I-
than they've looked in 30 years.
Well, thank you, ma'am. I appreciate
really
that. It was a lot of hard work on multiple individuals. And likewise, please take a look at, give an added plug to the Mount Dora football field as well.
So
Yes.
the actual annual cost of this lease is just a little bit over 100,000?
I think they broke it out, Mr. Dodd, they have, okay, the monthly payment is $42.94. The maintenance is $21.20 for a total payment of $64.14.
All right.
So it's like 70-something thousand.
Yeah, and some of that's operational, is the maintenance.
Some of it will be offset.
Right.
by the-
So I'm just wondering what the actual capital expense is, and if it seems like it's less than $250,000 a year. So do we need to still have 250 plugged into our capital plan, or are there other projects that we're gonna take care of from capital field replacement?
Well, then, I think what that does is if we take from the 250, the 48 we need, then obviously you still have that to assign to other projects
Right,
as a
right.
board.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it gives us more flexibility. Otherwise, we're gonna take it all in one chunk
Right.
for one project.
Yeah, no, I'm okay with that. I'm just wondering, yeah, it seems like we don't need 250 in each of these lines if we're not doing fields, right? So what other projects would we?
Well, we could do fields of other kind, right?
Sure.
We still got,
Well, and again, I think it's a placeholder.
It's a placeholder. You don't have to spend the whole
yeah, we don't
250.
have
If
to-
we don't, then, it rolls back into the capital plan, and next year we just adjust it for the correct
If this
amount.
works and we don't need the 250 every year, then it allows us flexibility to move it up through the capital plan.
Sure.
So
Right.
all of it's for the benefit of our kids. And the biggest thing, again, for me is that when you owe somebody money, they're gonna take care of it, and it's gonna be their baby. And it's a home run for us, I believe.
Yeah, so the other $1 million of high school athletic facility projects, that's not fields. What's?
Well, that's to be determined. I mean, from my perspective, when I see that, I am looking at press boxes, I'm looking at scoreboards, I'm looking at stands, I'm looking at lighting, I'm looking at access, I'm looking at parking,
Tennis
there's
courts.
not, yes, I'm looking at tennis courts, definitely looking at tennis courts.
Okay.
And then there's other requests
Okay. We
as
just
well
haven't-
too. So that's just something that, matter of fact, we didn't know what that number would look like. Scott has clearly worked incredibly hard to make that number look as good as it does.
Yeah, we just haven't specified
sir.
what the projects those are yet. Okay.
No, sir.
All right. All
But
right.
some of what you just said has been discussed
Yes, sir?
as a need.
And
Yes.
then just under that, all right, I don't want to get ahead of myself. I see it's your next bullet on here.
Nope. Yep.
Crisis.
Crisis management.
There we go. So that'll come out of ESSER and free up these dollars. Is that right?
If,
Some of
yeah,
Yeah, so when we put this placeholder in here, we didn't have an idea of what
Right,
they
right.
were actually providing to us. One of the things I heard him say today was the equipment's basically no charge, you're paying for the service, which completely took it out of capital outlay.
That's right. Mhm.
So I'll go back and see what kind of ESSER dollars. If we can't use ESSER directly, what we can do is use some other expenditures that are currently in the general fund, get that reimbursed by ESSER, and then free up dollars to go out of general
Okay.
fund.
So either way, it comes out of the capital plan, though.
Yes,
Okay.
that's true.
All right.
land acquisition priorities, the Wellness Way High School site is still in there. I have actually increased,
I'm sorry. I need to ask a question. I didn't see anything about the playgrounds, or did I miss that?
so the playgrounds were taken out because they're gonna be covered by ESSER dollars
Okay.
instead.
They were part of our ESSER
So-
plan for
Okay.
ESSER 3.
Just want to make sure, because I've
Yeah.
gotten quite a bit of feedback from one of the elementaries.
Right, so we had
Okay.
that in last year at $150 a year, and then when it was able to be covered by ESSER, then I took it back
So
out.
Tavares Elementary is somewhere in there to get some playground stuff.
Yes, I believe they're actually first on the list. They,
Wonderful.
there was a holdup in purchasing, just being able to get the equipment with all of the other shortages. And so I know that they're working on getting everything purchased and get it installed as soon as we can. We'd hoped it'd be this summer, but it might be a little bit delayed, but most things are.
That's
lately.
fine.
And so that I understand the protocol, we're gonna be voting on the capital plan, but don't we need to address this relationship with Jim so that Lake Jim, so Mr. Johnson can start working on the contract as a separate, or no?
It's separate from your decision to pass the capital fund, yeah.
It is 100%.
Yeah, all that's just telling you is where the money's coming from. You have to have a specific
So,
contract.
so with this conversation, can we move it to,
So we need to bring the contract back.
You're not passing any.
I know, but we need to bring forward this lake gym proposal because it's going to expire.
Right.
So can we do it by 6 o'clock? I declare it an emergency.
Well, it'd be hard
It is
to
time
just vote to
sensitive.
approve to go forward with it because you're missing something.
Okay, you never missed,
We do have a quorum.
So-
you missed.
So,
Type. You never do
so from what I'm understanding,
But
what
you
we can
never
do
do
is
that.
we can go ahead and have John and procurement go ahead and reach out and start the process, and then bring it back as an agenda item in an upcoming board meeting as soon as possible.
Okay,
Yeah, that works.
like by the next board meeting. Because there's a time sensitivity of getting these fields done for season. That's all. Okay, cool. All right, move forward.
The Wellness Way High School site, we have actually have some money from this year that was not expended on land acquisition, so you see that in the prior year committed column. And then I have actually added more money to next year in anticipation of buying that high school site in Wellness Way. We are also working on an elementary school site that would probably be funded through impact fee credits. And as the kind of North Groveland, South Leesburg area develops, we are looking actively for property in there. We are finishing up the purchase of the property in Howie that we had a contract on. And so we'll just keep forward, trying to find some land as we go in those high priority areas. And at this point now, just about everything's becoming high priority. So whenever we get a chance, we're gonna buy land. So this is the overall work plan. Were there any questions on any of those items?
Y'all have questions?
No.
I have questions.
Okay.
Okay, so, yeah, so at first I'd overlooked the prior year on the $5.2 million for land acquisition, so thanks for pointing that out, because I thought, how is $4 million gonna buy that land? Yeah, they would've been laughing too.
Yeah, yeah, they would.
So, okay, thinking about the South County High School, certainly that's a huge priority. Obviously, this $34 million in the 5th year of the plan is only partial funding on that. So, where are we really looking, like 10 years, 12 years, 37 years? Like, what is the?
You know, I think right now would be, the high school need is coming, definitely. I think we are probably 5 years out. I think if we can actively move something forward just outside this 5-year plan, I think that would probably be the best solution, both financially and, you know, to address that student capacity. You know, hopefully prices stabilize. It's a really bad time to build a high school right now. You know, I got an estimate on one that Orange County's building, and it's like $150 million. So obviously out of our price range. They're also building for like 3,000 students, so fortunately, we don't need anything quite that large.
Right.
But, you know, my goal really would be to have it before I retire. No, to have it in the 5 to 10 year horizon, preferably about 6 to 7 years.
Okay.
So we'll be actively working for that.
And we'd be able,
As we
so,
move
so,
forward.
let's say this thing comes in at $100 million. We're still looking at like another 68 million. I'm guessing, I guess what, if I predicted then, in order to make that happen, I guess like years 6 through 8 of this project, really all the impact fees are going to that specific project.
Yes, we will be using impact fees for, you know, every little bit of money that we can find.
Yeah.
We'll be going
And,
towards it.
Also, just thinking about the increased costs, and I see, you know, I pulled up last year's capital plan to see how prices have changed on particular sales tax projects. That had me wondering about the tail end of our list that we have put out there. Have any schools now fallen off of that because of these
They
rising
have
costs?
not. You know, I think if costs had not risen as much as they had, we would have had Oak Park fully funded, and, you know, I probably would have had a partial funding for the next school in line, which I think is Treadway. But frankly, I was just really happy not to have to drop anybody off the list. I was very afraid before I really went and put the numbers together that
Yeah.
we were gonna have to do that.
So how dangerously close are we to having a school drop off that list? Are we?
So we are, if you go to the worksheet, you'll see that I'm using some ad valorem for some of those outer projects and using some impact fees where impact fees are eligible. And so if we were relying completely on sales tax, we would not be able to do the program that we're looking at.
Okay. Also, just thinking about capacity items in here. I guess this is maybe an indication of the rising cost of building a student station. As villages now, we're talking like $44,000 a seat, and Windy Hill, $43,000, but our proportionate share is only collecting like $37,000, right? Is this kind of?
It is less than that for an elementary
Well,
school. It's like
I guess
24,000.
37 in a high school seat, so.
And, yeah, 35, 37 for a high school seat.
So maybe this is
Yes.
some sort of indication, a preview of impact fee studies going to suggest it costs a lot more to build a student seat than we thought it?
That would probably be very accurate.
All right.
I bet it's double.
Yeah, right. Yikes. The other piece I was thinking about, just from a facilities point of view, is the covered walkways. That I know a number of years ago, we saw a presentation on that. It was like $7 million to do that. Now it's like some ridiculous amount per linear foot. And I guess the one piece I wish, one piece of information I wish I had at that original presentation is that by not having covered walkways to restrooms, I believe we're in violation of state rules on the Florida Administrative Code on that. And so if we've got places where the walkway is needed for a student to get from their classroom to a restroom, I guess what does that look like, and how do we get in compliance with that?
We will do some hard work on that in the next couple of weeks.
All right.
And I know that, you know, maintenance and John's team have already been doing some work on that, so.
Sure. Yeah, I wasn't quite sure where we were on that and what that is going to cost, or how many of those are, I guess, covered walkways out of convenience versus how many of them lead to a restroom. But I guess I'd prioritize the restroom piece first. When you gotta go, and then it's raining, and you're like, then I gotta go even more. Where am I gonna go out there in the lightning? I don't know what to do. So, there was that one for me, just priority wise. And then, so if we're talking about increasing the capacity at Windy Hill, so we think that Aurelia Cole and Lake Point are not going to, like, this is going to be growth above and beyond, that those schools are going to be filled as well.
So Windy Hill, I really see as the Wellness Way Middle School. So, you know, Lake Point is pretty much full, frankly. There's a little bit more capacity, but I think we actually did a fairly good job on their attendance boundary. So it is pretty much, Lake Point is Lake Point. That leaves Windy Hill to serve all of the Wellness Way area at this point. And as I discussed when I first rolled this in, I see it more as a window of opportunity. So, you know, their population has dropped because of Lake Point. And right now, they're housing the Aurelia Cole students, but when those students go back, there will be a window of opportunity where we can take down portables to build the
That was my
addition.
question.
So,
I see.
so basically, you know, that's what we've looked at, is being able to take out some of those portables, build the addition, and then that gives us, before they become overcrowded. Or
And that-
they won't become overcrowded because they'll have a nice new addition.
I
But otherwise, their population's going to start going back up as,
Right, with Wellness Way.
as Wellness Way builds out.
And because certainly this is not enough to build a K-8 in Wellness Way. And so this will kind of hold us
Yeah.
over, and eventually we'll need to put one
Right.
there probably, right? Okay. All right. Thanks.
And I think, is that it? Any other questions? No? So the only other thing, since I am here in front of you, is we wanted to talk about Spring Creek Charter. So there's been some discussion about them purchasing the facility. And that is because it would allow them to, I think, borrow money in order to build a middle school addition and the gym. And right now, if the district-owned property, they are having difficulty doing that. So we did a lot of exploration on whether we could do that. There is a process that we have to follow that is the same as disposing of any other piece of property. So basically, you'll have to do a resolution, and we'll have to do an educational plant survey. The resolution, after talking to my contacts at DOE, basically their recommendation is that the resolution is that it is not necessary for district educational needs. And the same thing basically in the educational plant survey. And my recommendation would be that we do all of that together. We have a contract with Spring Creek to purchase their facility, and all of that basically go on the same agenda item. And the contract would be contingent upon DOE approval of the educational plant survey. So basically, it's all just kind of this process that all has to work together and be fairly carefully written. And so, we have not come to a contract with Spring Creek for the property. That would probably be the next step. But really, I think we wanted to discuss it with the board and make sure that there were no major concerns. And you can't give me direction to move ahead, but just make sure that there are no major concerns or any questions that you might have about what that would look like or what that process
I
would
have
be.
absolutely no concerns. Matter of fact, I'd be very excited about it.
I do have a question. So depending on how you answer my question will determine whether or not I have a concern. There are no students out there that would be adversely affected by that.
They would still be able to attend Spring Creek Charter. The one difference is they would no longer be a conversion charter
Right.
at all.
They'd be just a regular charter,
They'd
like a
just be a
charter.
regular charter, right. And so they would not have an attendance boundary.
Which the others don't either. Our conversions don't have that now.
Our conversion charters
they
do
have-
have
they
attendance
have a-
boundaries.
I thought that went away this coming year.
No, that
I
is
thought it was
something.
going to become a preference boundary or something.
That will be the next time we do an attendance boundary process, we will eliminate their attendance boundaries. I haven't done that yet because of, actually not Spring Creek, because of Mineola, because I don't have any place to send those kids. So that process has not gone all the way through. You'll see that. It's a board process. It's legally advertised. But Spring Creek, but what we're gonna do is offer them the opportunity to advertise a preference zone on our thing. We would not do that for Spring Creek any longer because they would not be a conversion charter.
So they wouldn't have another choice. They would just go there to Spring Creek.
They always have a choice.
Well-
It just basically, their primary attendance boundary, actually, if they look on the school locator for the district, we would show Spring Creek, but it would no longer say, this is a zone for Spring Creek or anything like that. It
And there are no
basically-
concerns with having that be?
I do have concerns, but I think Spring Creek it's kind of a different situation. So,
Yeah.
and they do a really good job of
Yeah.
marketing. So, students in Astor, Spring Creek is still gonna be their closest school. And as long as they are aware of that.
And that's my concern, because you got some kids out there that are way out in the middle of nowhere.
Right,
And
right.
I just wouldn't want to put them at a disadvantage.
Yeah, and I think, right now, Spring Creek is already had to turn some students away, just because they're over capacity in that grade. So they're already having to do that, and
So what
it
would happen to
just-
those kids like in
They go to
Astor?
Umatilla, or they go to,
So
Terminal
they'd have to
Springs.
travel further.
Right. I mean, and hopefully the students in Astor, there's so few students up there that they would still always be able to get into Spring Creek, but yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
right.
There's already a shift from them going to non-conversion, right?
Well, that's only in the personnel. That
Right.
doesn't, they're still a conversion charter
Right, but
because they're in our building.
Charter because of the ownership of the property.
If this sets the model, and if the other conversions came forward and wanted to buy their facility, we'd be out of debt.
yep, I know, I know.
All our debt is conversion. So we should encourage
That thought had crossed my mind, and so the other thought is that we no longer become obligated to all those elements and part of our maintenance agreement with the charters. Right?
Yep.
So I don't see why the district would want to retain the property if they have an interest in doing that.
And they will pay fair market value.
So we have an appraisal on it. We have not negotiated a contract with them, but, you know, that would be the intention. Okay.
And the upside to them is that they don't have to come to us, and they can borrow money.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a win-win, quite honestly.
Yeah.
So we will move forward with that and proceed with that then. And that is, I think, all I had.
There was one other project in there that I don't know if the board is up to speed on, was the Claremont Center. I don't know to what extent you all have information on that, but I saw $4 million plugged in on that for this coming year, and
That project is still in determination and still in development, so I'm going to
I think
defer to
I've
the
spoken
superintendent.
with all the board,
Okay.
so they're aware that we do have a plan in place. We actually have a meeting tomorrow with Lake Sumter and Lake Tech to kind of formalize what that vision and plan will be. We'll have that meeting with the city that I know you'll be attending on behalf of the board, and then at some point within that time period, I do want to bring it to the board once we have all of the details worked out and have a little bit clearer direction as to how we want to use the facilities, but yeah, we're pretty excited about it.
All right. So I had just increased that. We had 2 million last year in there, and so I had just increased that, knowing that costs were increasing and kind of undetermined scope yet so far. Okay.
all right.
All right.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Those are all our topics for today. I guess that brings us to the board member comments. I'm gonna guess many of you would want to wait till the 6 o'clock meeting. All right, Superintendent, do you have anything specific for this meeting? All right, how about you, Mr. Johnson? All right. With that, not seeing any objections, we are adjourned.